Good evening and welcome back to the International Space Station Flight Control Room at the Johnson Space Center in Houston, where at this hour, the journey of Kevin Ford of NASA and Russian cosmonauts Oleg Novitsky and Evgeny Tarelkin is in the final act, as they are prepared for a deorbit burn just 27.5 minutes from now in their Soyuz TMA-06M spacecraft that will begin the journey home to wrap up 144 days in space, 142 days aboard the International Space Station, and a journey of almost 61 million miles spanning 2,304 orbits of the Earth. Everything is in readiness for the homecoming of Ford, Novitsky, and Tarelkin as the Soyuz, now almost 12 kilometers away from the International Space Station, from which it undocked 2 hours ago at 6:43 p.m. Central Time. The Soyuz has moved into a position for the 4-minute, 44-second retrograde firing of the Soyuz engines that will begin a 53-minute journey home and a landing on a frigid steppe of Kazakhstan, 36 miles to the northeast of the remote town of Arkalyk. Some 5 hours ago at 3:38 p.m. Central Time, the departing Expedition 34 crew and the remaining Expedition 35 crew members had an opportunity to say farewell to one another in the small passageway linking the Soyuz TMA-06M spacecraft with the Poisk module on the space-facing side of the Zvezda service module on the Russian segment of the International Space Station. As the crew members said goodbye to one another, it set the stage for the closing of the hatches and the beginning of the journey home for Ford, Novitsky, and Tarelkin, who were launched back on October 23rd last year from the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan, arriving on board the International Space Station on October 25th. As you can see in this replay of the video from 5 hours ago, the departing crew made its way into the hatchway to the orbital module, the upper portion of the 3-section Soyuz spacecraft, after which they had an opportunity to say a few final words to one another before closing the hatch and beginning the process of leak checks that resulted in an airtight seal and the depressurization of the vestibule, the small passageway that you're seeing between the Soyuz and Poisk, before they donned their Sokol launch and entry suits, conducted leak checks of those suits in the precursor to the actual undocking that took place a couple of hours later. Once again, you're seeing the final farewells as Oleg Novitsky, you can see in the hatchway the Soyuz commander wiping down the hatchway to make sure that no debris would interfere with the closing of the hatches and the leak checks that would ensue. The crew members saying final farewells to one another. The Expedition 35 crew on the space station side of the docking interface now left as a 3-man crew with Expedition 35 Commander Chris Hadfield of the Canadian Space Agency, his NASA flight engineer crewmate Tom Marshburn, and Russian cosmonaut Roman Romanenko, who will be a 3-man crew for the next 2 weeks until the launch of Pavel Vinogradov, Chris Cassidy, and Alexander Mazurkin in the wee hours of March 29th, 2 weeks from today, as they begin their journey to the International Space Station on a single-day launch to docking expedited fast track of 4 orbits in 6 hours from launch to docking. They will join up with Hadfield, Romanenko, and Marshburn to re-up to a 6-man crew on board the International Outpost and Expedition 35. Again, this is video that was captured at 3:38 p.m. Central Time this afternoon, about 5 hours ago, as the crew members said farewell to one another before closing the hatches between the Soyuz TMA-06M spacecraft and the Poisk module to begin the preparations for undocking. Romanenko on the left in the red shirt, and Chris Hadfield snapping final photos of his crewmates before the closing of the hatch that you'll see just a moment from now. As you watch this replay, we now are hearing that the sun is rising at the landing site. It is dawn at the landing site on the steppe of Kazakhstan, and we'll talk about the helicopter deployments for the search and recovery forces in just a moment. But the sun is beginning to rise at the landing site. It is extremely cold. The temperature is hovering just over 0 degrees Fahrenheit at this hour. The sunrise and the sun expected to warm the landing site by a few degrees, but it is going to be very, very frigid conditions for Ford Novitzky and Turelkin at landing. Now you see the hatches being closed and secured on the station side of the docking interface. A similar hatch closure took place on the Soyuz side of the docking interface, and the commencement of leak checks to ensure that we had an airtight seal between the two docking interfaces prior to undocking. With all of those leak checks having been accomplished and the crew having climbed into their Sokol launch and entry suits, the command was given at 6:40 p.m. Central Time to begin hooks unlatching from the docking interface on the Poisk module, and at 6:43 p.m. springs on both sides of the docking interface pushed off against one another to enable physical separation of the Soyuz from the Poisk module docking port to which it had been attached since October 25th. 3 minutes after physical separation, 2 thrusters on the Soyuz fired for 15 seconds and a separation burn that enabled the Soyuz to begin to phase away from the station to the point at which it is now about 12 kilometers away for the deorbit burn that is scheduled 20 minutes and 30 seconds from now. And again, this video from an external camera on the Soyuz vehicle as it departed the International Space Station that had been the home for Ford Novitzky and Turelkin for 142 days. Again, that was video of the undocking from an external television camera on the Soyuz as the TMA-06M and its 3 passengers, Ford, Novitzky, and Turelkin, flying under the call sign of Kazbek that you'll hear referenced very frequently during the VHF audio conversations between Russian flight controllers at the Russian Mission Control Center in Korolyov outside Moscow and the crew as they descend for their landing over the course of the next hour and 12 minutes. Kazbek, the name of one of the major mountains of the Caucasus, that mountain range located between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea, that call sign selected by Soyuz Commander Oleg Novitzky. Down at the landing site in Kazakhstan, as we mentioned, the sun beginning to rise. That should warm the landing site temperatures just a bit. However, the current forecast calls for very clear skies. You can see this radar imagery, the circle representing the landing target for the Soyuz TMA-06M spacecraft and its 3 crew members, Ford, Novitzky, and Turelkin, with landing scheduled just 1 hour, 11 minutes from now. The fog and freezing rain that delayed landing by 24 hours passed to the east of the landing site overnight, enabling helicopters to deploy from the prime staging city of Kustanay, Kazakhstan, just across the border from Russia, that you can see here in this landing map. They flew in the wee hours Friday morning U.S. time from Kustanai down to Arkelik and further to the west to pre-stage at a ballistic landing site that would be employed in the highly unlikely event that a problem with the Soyuz vehicle during entry would cause it to fall short, well short of its intended landing target. That landing target in the bullseye that you see is about 36 miles to the northeast of Arkelik. And at this hour, other helicopters, the final quartet of helicopters deploying from Kustanai, are airborne. Their departure back-timed so that they arrive in the vicinity of the landing site right around the time the Soyuz will arrive as well under its main parachute. Other helicopters are expected to deploy in the next 25 minutes or so from Arkelik itself, where they have spent, their crew members and members of the landing team have spent the night. Those helicopters will be airborne in about 25 minutes for a 30-minute flight, a much shorter flight, to the prime landing site. The bottom line is that 8 out of the 12 helicopters associated with tonight's recovery operations will converge around the vicinity of the landing site to the northeast of Arkelik at the time that the Soyuz is within view under its main chute. Just a few minutes before its landing, those helicopters will be circling around the landing zone in an oval-shaped racetrack pattern as they wait for the arrival of the Soyuz under its main chute. 2 other helicopters, Russian Mi-8 helicopters, are being dispatched midway between the prime landing site and the ballistic landing zone so that they may fly in either direction depending on the disposition of the Soyuz's entry track, which moves from southwest to northeast toward the prime landing site itself. And the final 2 helicopters in this choreographed scenario tonight are to the far west at the western edge of the ballistic landing zone in the unlikely event, as we said, that they would come into play for tonight's recovery operations. In addition to the dozen helicopters in play, there are 3 fixed-wing aircraft, including a large Antonov 24 aircraft that you see in this picture in the upper right-hand corner. That Antonov aircraft serves as a flying command and relay center, if you will, that the Russian search and recovery forces, known as Rosaviatsia, use to relay data and communications from the Soyuz crew when they approach the landing site itself. All of that data and communications relayed back to the Russian flight control team at the Russian Mission Control Center in Korolyov outside Moscow. You're looking at a live view from a balcony camera overlooking the International Space Station Flight Control Room in Korolyov. In addition, there are a half-dozen all-terrain vehicles poised at the landing site itself, which will move into proximity of the capsule to begin the process of providing imagery from the landing site. We hope for live video of the crew being extracted from the Soyuz once it has landed and it is safe to approach the vehicle itself. The crew will be extracted one by one from the Soyuz vehicle. The commander, Novitsky, is extracted first, followed by, we think, in the order that it usually goes in, by Yevgeny Tarelkin from the left seat, and finally Kevin Ford from the right seat of the descent module itself. Those all-terrain vehicles will be standing by as the 3 crew members are placed in reclining chairs and bundled up against the extreme cold at the landing site itself tonight, which is Saturday morning Kazakhstan time. One by one, the crew members will be raised in those reclining chairs and brought into an inflatable medical tent nearby that will be erected by RSC and Nergia personnel who are working in conjunction with the search and recovery forces this evening. They will be brought into that inflatable medical tent, which is heated so that they can get out of those bulky Sokol launch and entry suits and into more comfortable flight clothing. They'll be administered to initial medical exams by a team of flight surgeons on hand, representing each of the 3 crew members, including a NASA team of flight surgeons accompanying the NASA delegation, along with the search and recovery forces participating in tonight's recovery operations. Once the crew is deemed fit and ready to fly back to the staging city of Kustanai. They'll be brought one by one into all-terrain vehicles that will drive them a short distance to 3 individual helicopters that will take off for the 2-hour flight back to the staging city of Kustanai, Kazakhstan. In Kustanai, Kevin Ford will say goodbye for the time being to his 2 Russian colleagues, Novitsky and Tarelkin. He will board a NASA plane for the flight back to Houston. Novitsky and Tarelkin